Captain Han-Sol Kim walked into the huge glass chamber where aliens from across the galaxy made their important decisions. His old blue uniform looked dirty and worn compared to everything else that sparkled like diamonds around him. The alien leaders sat in floating chairs that glowed with strange lights, and their translator devices made soft humming sounds as they talked. Through the giant windows behind Han-Sol, everyone could see Earth's spaceship floating in the darkness of space. The Soul's Pride looked nothing like the sleek, shiny vessels that belonged to other worlds. Instead, it looked like someone had taken 1,000 different pieces of metal and welded them together with whatever they could find. Brown rust stains covered parts of the hull, and you could see where emergency repairs had been made with thick metal patches. Some areas were painted different colors because they couldn't find matching paint. The ship's engines were old and made loud noises, and several of its windows had been replaced with whatever glass they could find. The Nexari delegate, who looked like a walking piece of clear jelly, started to shake in what Han-Sol realized was laughter. Other aliens around the room began making strange sounds that their computers translated as giggles and chuckles. The Velthari, who looked like walking crystals that caught light in beautiful ways, made musical tinkling sounds. That filled the air. "Is this really what the humans think will impress us?" asked a tall alien with purple skin and too many eyes. "This pile of junk looks like it should be in a scrapyard, not flying between stars." Standing next to her captain, Engineer Erin Park felt her face getting hot with anger. She had spent years working on that ship, fixing it with her own hands when fancy parts weren't available. Every dent and scratch had a story. Every weird repair had saved their lives at least once. These aliens looked at their beautiful, perfect ships and thought that was what made them strong. But Erin knew something they didn't. Sometimes things that look broken on the outside work better than anything else. The Galactic Trade Council chamber was enormous, with walls that seemed to stretch up forever. Holographic displays showed star maps and trade routes throughout the galaxy. Everything was designed to make visitors feel small and unimportant. The alien representatives sat on platforms that moved through the air, looking down at Han-Sol. Like he was a child asking for permission to play with the adults. Han-Sol had seen this kind of treatment before. When humans first learned to fly in space, everyone laughed at their rockets that used fire and explosions to move. When they built their first space stations, aliens said they looked like metal cans floating in the dark. But those same humans had survived ice ages, world wars and disasters that would have destroyed other species. They had learned to make things work, even when they didn't have the right tools or materials. The Soul's Pride might look ugly compared to the smooth, graceful ships of advanced civilizations, but it had something those other vessels didn't have. It had been built by people who knew that sometimes you had to make do with what you had. Every repair had been done by human hands. Every modification had been tested in the harsh reality of deep space travel. While other species relied on computers and artificial intelligence to fix their problems, humans still got their hands dirty and figured things out the old-fashioned way. The alien council members whispered among themselves in their strange languages, while their computers translated everything into cold, emotionless words. Han-Sol stood perfectly still, waiting for their decision, but he could already see it in their glowing eyes and crystal faces. They weren't going to make this easy. The head counselor, a creature that looked like it was made of living metal, finally spoke. "Humans may join our trade alliance, but first you must prove you deserve it." The words came out slow and deliberate, like a judge announcing a prison sentence. "You will take the Crimson Nebula passage, the route through the red gas clouds, where our sensors cannot reach and our communications cannot penetrate." Several aliens in the chamber made sounds that the translators couldn't even convert to words. Han-Sol realized they were expressing something between pity and amusement. The Crimson Nebula was famous throughout the galaxy, but not for good reasons. It was the place where ships went to disappear forever. 17 vessels have attempted that route in the past year, continued the metallic counselor. None have returned. The hegemony's finest warships, equipped with the most advanced technology in known space, have vanished without sending so much as a distress signal. But perhaps human creativity will succeed where superior technology has failed. The way the alien said creativity made it sound like a disease. Back on the Soul's Pride, the air recycling system hummed and wheezed as it pushed stale air through the ship's corridors. The mess hall was barely big enough for the entire crew of 32 people, with metal tables bolted to the floor and chairs that had been repaired so many times they were more tape and wire than original material. Commander Do-Hyun Lee stood at the front of the room, looking at faces he had known for years. These weren't the clean, perfectly trained crews you saw on the fancy alien ships. These were people with dirt under their fingernails and scars on their hands from fixing things. That should have been replaced years ago. So here's the deal, Do-Hyun said, his voice carrying easily in the small space. The aliens think we're too stupid to live, and they've decided to prove it by sending us on a suicide mission. He paused to let that sink in. The Crimson Nebula. Passage has killed every ship that's tried it. Military vessels with weapons that could destroy planets. Explorer ships with sensors that can detect a coin flip from 1,000,000 miles away. All gone. Mechanic Jaemin Woo raised his hand. How many ships are we talking about? 17 in the last year. 0 survivors. The room got very quiet. Someone coughed. The air recycling system made a grinding noise that everyone had learned to ignore months ago. Pilot Min-Seo Choi stood up from her seat near the back. She was small but had the kind of intense eyes that made people listen when she talked. "You know what I think?" she said, cracking her knuckles one by one. "I think those other ships died because they were too fancy, too dependent on their computers and their perfect technology." She walked to the front of the room, her boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. "We've been flying this rust bucket for 3 years, and every single day something breaks that shouldn't be fixable. But we fix it anyway. We make things work that have no right to work." The Crimson Nebula looked like someone had painted the entire universe red. Thick clouds of gas swirled around the Soul's Pride, making it impossible to see more than a few hundred meters in any direction. The ship's old sensors struggled to penetrate the dense fog, giving off warning beeps every few seconds that had become background noise after 3 weeks of travel. Navigator Kyung-Ho Bae had been plotting their course through the nebula using star charts that were probably older than he was. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates where the last hegemony ship sent its final transmission," he called out from his station. The bridge was cramped and filled with the constant hum of overworked machinery, but everyone knew their job and did it without complaint. That's when Communications Officer Jin Woo-nam's screen lit up with contacts that shouldn't exist. "Sir, I'm reading multiple large objects ahead," he said, his voice tight with concentration. They're moving in patterns that don't match any known ship designs." Through the red mist, shapes began to emerge that made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing and stare. These weren't ships in any sense that humans understood. They looked like enormous sea creatures that had somehow learned to swim through the vacuum of space. Parts of them seemed to be made of metal and machinery, but other sections pulsed and moved like living tissue. They were easily 10 times the size of the Soul's Pride, with tentacle-like appendages that reached out into the nebula as if they were feeling their way through the darkness. "My God," whispered Engineer Erin Park, who had come up to the bridge to check on a power coupling. "What are those things?" Before anyone could answer, Jin Woo's equipment picked up a distress signal. It was faint and breaking up, but they could make out enough to understand that someone was in serious trouble. "Captain, there's a hegemony patrol ship about 2 kilometers ahead. They're under attack." On the main screen, they watched in horror as one of the massive creatures wrapped its metallic tentacles around a sleek alien warship. The hegemony vessel was beautiful in the way that all advanced alien technology was beautiful. Smooth curves, no visible weapons, powered by energy sources that human scientists still didn't fully understand. It fired its defensive systems, sending brilliant beams of light that should have been capable of cutting through asteroids. But something impossible happened. The creature absorbed the energy weapons like a sponge soaking up water. Then, to everyone's amazement, it began firing those same weapons back at other ships in the area. The stolen energy beams were somehow more powerful than they had been, originally tearing through the hulls of fleeing vessels like they were made of paper. "They're learning," Jin Woo said, his voice barely above a whisper. Every time a ship fires at them, they adapt. They're turning our own weapons against us. Captain Hansol watched the tactical display with the same calm expression he wore when reviewing supply reports. While other ships in the area were fleeing in panic, sending desperate messages and firing wildly at the creatures, he made a decision that went against every military instinct his crew had ever learned. "All stop," he ordered quietly. "Bring us to a complete halt." "Sir?" questioned pilot Minseo Choi, her hands hovering over the controls. "You heard me? Full stop. And shut down. Everything except life support and basic navigation. No active sensors, no communication arrays, no defensive systems. Make us as quiet as possible." The bridge fell silent, except for the sound of systems powering down one by one. Through the red mist, they could see the creatures continuing their attack on the remaining hegemony ships, but something strange was happening. The massive beings seemed to be losing interest in vessels that weren't fighting back. Down in the engineering section of the Soul's Pride, Arene Park was surrounded by screens showing numbers that didn't make sense. The ship's power systems had always been a mess, a combination of human fusion technology, salvaged alien components, and repairs made with whatever materials they could find. But now, as she watched the creatures outside attacking other vessels, something clicked in her mind. "Wait a minute," she said to herself, pulling up the power readings from the past hour. Her team of engineers gathered around her workstation, which was really just a collection of mismatched computer screens held together with metal brackets and hope. "Look at this." Erin pointed to a section of the display where their reactor's output looked like a child's scribbled drawing instead of the smooth lines you'd expect from advanced technology. "When our fusion reactor started acting up 20 minutes ago, those things completely ignored us. But every time we see a clean, steady power signature from other ships, the creatures go straight for them." Young engineer Tae-Sung Kim, who had joined the crew fresh out of technical school, stared at the data. "You're saying they hunt by sensing power output?" "Not just any power output," Erin said, her excitement growing. "Clean energy, stable fusion signatures, the kind of perfect power generation that advanced civilizations are so proud of." She pulled up recordings of the creature attacks they had witnessed. Every ship they've destroyed had textbook perfect energy readings. But look at us. Our reactor output looks like someone having a seizure. The engineering bay was cramped and filled with the constant sounds of machinery that probably should have been replaced years ago. Pipes ran along the ceiling in directions. That made no logical sense, and half the equipment was held in place with industrial-strength adhesive tape. But these imperfections, which had embarrassed them in front of the Galactic Council, might now be their salvation. "So what you're telling me," said Chief Mechanic Bora Lim, "is that our ship is so messed up that even space monsters can't figure out how to eat it." Erin nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I'm saying, but I think we can make it even worse." What happened next would have made any respectable engineer in the galaxy faint with horror. The human crew deliberately began sabotaging their own ship's systems. They introduced power fluctuations by randomly disconnecting and reconnecting energy. Couplings. They made their computer systems conflict with each other, creating electronic interference that served no purpose except to confuse anyone trying to get a clear reading on their capabilities. Sparks flew from control panels as Tai-Sung rewired systems to work against each other. The artificial gravity flickered on and off in different sections of the ship. The air recycling system began running backwards in some areas before correcting itself. Even the food processors were made to malfunction in carefully controlled ways. "This is the stupidest thing I've ever done," muttered Bora, as she used a wrench to deliberately loosen a coupling that had been working perfectly fine. "We're breaking our own ship on purpose." But it worked. On the bridge, Captain Hansol watched through the view screen as the massive creatures approached their position, then seemed to lose interest. The beings circled the Soul's Pride like confused predators, their tentacles reaching out as if trying to taste the ship's energy signature, but finding nothing they could understand or absorb. Commander Do-Hyun Lee stood next to his captain, watching the impossible scene unfold. "Sir, I think our engineer just figured out how to make us invisible to space monsters by making our ship even more broken than it already was." Hansol allowed himself a small smile. "Send a message to the crew. Tell them their grandmothers. Duct tape repairs just saved all our lives. News traveled fast in the galaxy, especially when it was the kind of news that shouldn't have been possible. Within days of the Soul's Pride's escape from the Crimson Nebula, every major communication network was buzzing with the same unbelievable story. The humans, those primitive scavengers with their rust bucket of a ship, had not only survived the passage that killed advanced warships, but they had figured out how to make the legendary Devourers completely ignore them. At first, nobody believed it. The Nexari Trade Federation's official response was that the humans had obviously taken a different route and were lying about their achievement. The Velthari Crystal Collective suggested that the primitive human sensors had simply malfunctioned, and they had never actually encountered the creatures at all. But when the Soul's Pride docked at Kepler Station with sensor logs, video recordings, and samples of the strange energy signatures they had detected, the galaxy had to accept an uncomfortable truth. The humans had done something that nobody else could do. Within 3 months, Captain Hansol's personal communication device was overflowing with job offers. These weren't the simple cargo runs or passenger transport missions that new species usually started with. These were the jobs that made seasoned space captains wake up in cold sweats. Rescue missions to systems where ships had been sending distress signals for years. Exploration contracts to regions of space where automated probes stopped responding. Transportation jobs through territories controlled by pirates, void spawn, or worse things that didn't have names yet. "Captain," said communications officer Jin Woo Nam, scrolling through the latest batch of offers on his screen. "We've got 17 new contracts today. Half of them are offering payment rates that are, well, they're either desperate or they think we're going to die." Hansol looked at the list while sipping his morning coffee, which was made from beans that had been recycled so many times they barely qualified as coffee anymore. "What's the most dangerous one?" "There's a research station in the void fields that's been silent for 6 months. 3 rescue attempts have failed. The last ship that went in started broadcasting in languages that don't exist. Then all contact was lost. We'll take it." The crew had learned not to question their captain's decisions. If Hansol thought they could handle a job, they probably could. And if they couldn't, well, they'd figure something out. They always did. Their reputation grew with each impossible mission they completed. The Soul's Pride became famous throughout the galaxy, not for being the most advanced or the most powerful ship, but for being the one that somehow survived when survival should have been impossible. They rescued colonists from a planet where the very air had turned hostile. They delivered critical supplies through a region of space where the laws of physics seemed to work differently. They even managed to establish peaceful contact with a species that had been considered completely hostile to all intelligent life. Other species began to study them, trying to understand what made humans different. Military analysts wrote reports, attempting to explain their success. Scientists created theories about human psychology and their apparent inability to recognize when they were facing certain death. But the truth was much simpler than any of the experts realized. Captain Yunji Seo had been a successful merchant captain for 15 years before her ship was attacked by void spawn in the Outer Rim. Her crew had been trapped for 3 days, watching their life support systems fail while the creatures circled their vessel like sharks. When the Soul's Pride had arrived and somehow convinced the void spawn to leave peacefully, she knew she had to understand how they did it. The emergency signal hit every communication device in known space at exactly the same time. It was the kind of alert that made space traffic controllers drop their coffee and military commanders cancel their leave. The message was short, direct, and terrifying. All vessels avoid galactic core. Ancient threat active. Extreme danger. On the Soul's Pride, which was docked at a trading station for routine repairs, the crew gathered around their main communication screen as more details came through. The images were grainy and distorted, taken by long-range sensors from ships that were fleeing as fast as their engines could carry them. But what they showed made everyone in the room go quiet. Something massive was moving through the star systems near the center of the galaxy. It looked like a geometric nightmare, perfectly straight lines and impossible angles that hurt to look at directly. Whatever it was bigger than most space stations and moved with the kind of precise, calculated motion that only came from artificial intelligence. "The Nexari are calling it the Architect," said Jin Wu-nam, reading from the incoming reports. "Apparently it's some kind of ancient war machine that's been sleeping for thousands of years, and now it's awake." The reports that followed painted a picture that got worse by the hour. The hegemony's Third Fleet, which included some of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, had been completely destroyed in less than 10 minutes. But they hadn't been blown up or torn apart like you'd expect from a battle. Instead, their own weapons had turned against them. Their navigation systems had stopped working properly, sending ships crashing into each other. Their life support systems had shut down or started producing poisonous gas instead of breathable air. "It's using their technology against them," explained engineer Aaron Park, who had been studying the technical reports. "The more advanced a ship's computer systems, the faster this thing can take control of them. It's like a virus, but one that works on any kind of artificial intelligence." The Galactic Council called an emergency session that was broadcast across all major networks. The same chamber where they had laughed at humanity's rusty ship was now filled with panic. Delegates who usually spent their time arguing about trade, routes and taxation were instead trying to figure out how to stop something that could turn their own fleets into weapons. The Velthari representative, whose crystal body was flickering with colors that indicated extreme stress, spoke first. 3 star systems have gone silent in the past 6 hours. We estimate that over 50 million lives have been lost, and the Architect shows no signs of slowing down. The Nexari delegate's translucent form was trembling. "Our most powerful AI defense systems are useless. The moment they encounter this machine, they become part of it. We are essentially defenseless." For the first time in galactic history, the advanced civilizations that had always looked down on primitive species were admitting they needed help. The same delegates who had mocked the soul's pride just months earlier were now desperately searching for any solution, no matter how unlikely. "We need someone whose technology is too primitive for the Architect to understand or control," said the head counselor, the words coming out like they tasted bitter. "We need the humans." The message reached Captain Hansol while he was reviewing repair schedules in his quarters. The communication was marked with the highest priority codes and came directly from the Galactic Council's Emergency Command Center. When he opened it, he found something he had never expected to see: a formal request for help from the same aliens who had considered him barely worthy of membership in their trade alliance. The journey to the galactic core took 2 weeks, and during that time, something strange started happening aboard the Soul's Pride. Systems that had been barely holding together for years suddenly began working in ways they never should have been able to work. It wasn't that they were running better. They were running completely wrong. But somehow that wrongness was creating results that defied explanation. Chief Mechanic Seung-ho Park had been working on starships for 20 years. But he had never seen readings like the ones coming from his diagnostic equipment. He called Captain Hansol down to the engineering section to see for himself, because nobody was going to believe this in a report. "Sir, I've run these tests 5 times, and I keep getting the same impossible results," Seung-ho said, pointing to a screen that showed their ship's power distribution. The display looked like someone had drawn it while having a seizure. Lines going in every direction, power flowing through circuits that shouldn't have been connected, and energy readings that jumped around like they couldn't decide what they wanted to be. "Our main fusion reactor is running on standard human engineering principles," he continued, "but it's somehow connected to that Velthari crystal power cell we installed last year, which operates on completely different physics. And that's feeding power to the Nexari gravity generator we bought when our old one broke, which uses principles that shouldn't be compatible with either of the other systems." Hansol studied the display, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "So what you're telling me is that our ship is powered by 3 different types of science that shouldn't be able to work together. That's just the beginning, sir. We've got navigation systems that use human stellar cartography, but they're taking input from alien sensors that measure space in ways our computers don't understand." Our life support is running on recycled Earth technology, but it's being monitored by artificial intelligence that one of the other crews gave us when they couldn't figure out how to make it work with their own systems. Engineer Erin Park joined the conversation, carrying a datapad that showed structural analysis of their ship. Captain, according to every engineering manual in known space, this ship should have torn itself apart years ago. The metal stress patterns alone should have caused catastrophic failure. But look at this. She showed him readings that indicated their hull was actually getting stronger over time, not weaker. Somehow, the constant repairs and modifications had created a structure that was more flexible and durable than it had been when it was new. We've been grafting alien technology onto human engineering for 3 years, Erin explained. Every time something broke, we fixed it with whatever we could find. Nexari hull plating over human structural beams, Velthari energy conduits, running through Earth-made support systems. Even our food processors are running software from 4 different civilizations. Seung-ho pulled up another display that made Han Sol's head hurt, just looking at it. Our computer systems are the strangest part. We've got human programming trying to interface with alien hardware, controlled by artificial intelligence that speaks 3 different programming languages simultaneously. By every rule of computer science, this should result in total system failure. But instead we've accidentally created the most unpredictable computer network in the galaxy. Our systems make decisions that no programmer ever intended, solve problems using methods that don't appear in any textbook, and somehow always manage to keep us alive when they should be getting us killed. As they approached the area where the architect had been detected, the Soul's Pride began behaving in ways that even its own crew didn't understand. Systems activated themselves without being ordered. The ship's course adjusted automatically to avoid hazards that their sensors hadn't even detected yet. Their communication array started picking up signals from sources that their equipment shouldn't have been able to reach. "It's like the ship knows where we're going," whispered Navigator Kyung-ho Bae from his position on the bridge. "I'm not even steering anymore, it's steering itself." The architect appeared from behind a dead planet, like a nightmare made of mathematics. It was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, but perfectly geometric in ways that made human eyes water when they tried to focus on it. Every surface was a flawless angle, every edge was razor straight, and it moved through space with the kind of precision that only came from a mind that had calculated every possible outcome. On the bridge of the Soul's Pride, alarms were going, off in 7 different languages, as their sensors tried to make sense of what they were seeing. The ancient war machine didn't look like any ship anyone had ever built. It looked like someone had taken the concept of perfect engineering and turned it into a weapon. "Captain, it's scanning us," reported Jinwoo Nam, his voice tight with concentration. "I'm reading active sensor sweeps across every frequency we can detect, and probably a lot we can't." The architect's response was immediate and terrifying. Beams of energy lanced out from its surface, but they weren't trying to destroy the Soul's Pride. Instead, they were targeting specific systems with surgical precision. The first beam hit their navigation computer, trying to take control of their steering. The second targeted their weapons systems, attempting to turn their own guns against them. But something unexpected happened. Instead of taking control, the architect's signals seemed to bounce off their systems like water off oil. The ancient machine's perfect calculations had been designed to interface with logical, well-organized technology. What it found aboard the human ship was the exact opposite of logic. "Sir, it's trying to hack our computers," called out Communications Officer Jinwoo. "But our systems are too messed up for it to understand. It keeps sending control signals, but our computers can't figure out what it wants them to do." Engineer Erin Park was watching her diagnostic screens in amazement. "The architect is trying to take control of our fusion reactor, but our reactor is connected to alien power systems that don't make sense. It's like trying to drive a car by giving directions to a bicycle." Captain Han Sol made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed in any proper military. "All hands, this is the captain. We're going to do something that's either brilliant or suicidal, and I'm not sure which. Prepare for emergency. Overload of all systems." The crew looked at each other in confusion. Emergency overload was something you did when your ship was about to explode and you wanted to make sure it took your enemies with you. It wasn't a battle tactic, it was a way to commit suicide with style. "Sir," said Commander Do Hyun Lee, "are you ordering us to deliberately destroy our own ship?" "Not destroy. Overload. Every system all at the same time. Push everything past its safety limits and see what happens." What happened next would have made every engineering instructor in the galaxy weep. The Soul's Pride's fusion reactor began, running at 150% capacity, pouring energy into systems that were already struggling to contain normal power levels. Their salvaged alien weapons started firing in sequences that made no tactical sense, shooting at empty space in patterns that seemed random but somehow felt purposeful. The artificial gravity generators began creating pockets of distorted space-time throughout the ship. In some corridors, crew members felt twice as heavy as normal. In others, they floated weightlessly. The ship's computer systems, already confused by years of incompatible modifications, started making decisions that no programmer had ever intended. Sparks flew from every control panel as the Soul's Pride became something that had never existed before, a ship powered by controlled chaos. Energy flowed through circuits in directions it was never meant to go. Systems that had been jury-rigged together years ago suddenly found new ways to work together that defied every law of engineering. The architect, faced with this storm of technological impossibility, did something it had never done in thousands of years of perfect operation. It hesitated. The moment the Soul's Pride began its chaotic overload, something incredible happened that no one had planned for. The architect, in its attempt to understand and control the human ship's systems, made a fatal mistake. It tried to copy the ship's power signatures and technological patterns, thinking it could turn them into weapons, just like it had done with every other vessel it had encountered. But you can't copy chaos. You can't replicate something that works by accident. The ancient war machine began incorporating the Soul's Pride's conflicting energy patterns into its own systems. Its perfect geometric structure started developing irregularities as it tried to process technology that operated on 7 different scientific principles simultaneously. Sections of the architect began fighting against other sections as incompatible systems were forced to work together. "Captain, you need to see this," called out Navigator Kyung-ho Bae, his voice filled with amazement. "The architect it's attacking itself." On the main screen, they watched as the massive war machine began to tear itself apart from the inside. Weapons that had been designed to destroy entire fleets were now firing randomly at parts of the architect's own structure. Its navigation systems were sending conflicting commands, causing different sections to move in opposite directions. The perfect artificial intelligence that had been unstoppable for thousands of years was now experiencing something it had never encountered before. Complete system failure caused by trying to be logical about something that was fundamentally illogical. The explosion, when it came, was like watching a star being born in reverse. The architect collapsed in on itself, its perfect geometry crumbling as its own weapons continued firing until the very last moment. Then, in a flash of light that could be seen from 3 star systems away, the ancient war machine that had destroyed entire civilizations simply ceased to exist. In the silence that followed, the Soul's Pride drifted alone in space, surrounded by debris that sparkled in the light of nearby stars. The ship looked worse than ever. Hull plates had buckled from the energy overload, several systems were smoking, and there were scorch marks on every surface. But it was still in one piece, still alive, still stubbornly refusing to accept that. It should have been destroyed. Captain Hansol stood on his bridge, looking out at the field of wreckage that had once been an unstoppable force. His uniform was torn, his face was covered in soot from a minor electrical fire, and he was pretty sure the coffee maker had finally given up completely. But he was alive, his crew was alive, and somehow they had just saved the galaxy. "Sir," said Communications Officer Jin Woo Nam, "I'm receiving transmission from the Galactic Council's emergency fleet. They're asking for confirmation that the threat has been eliminated." "Tell them the architect is gone," Hansol replied, "and tell them we're going to need some time to patch up our ship before we head home." Within hours, the area around the battle site was filled with ships from every major civilization in the galaxy. Scientists, military analysts, engineers, and reporters all wanted to understand how a primitive human vessel had accomplished what their most advanced technology could not. They scanned the debris field, analyzed the energy readings, and studied every piece of data they could find. But the real changes began in the months that followed. Shipyards across the galaxy started receiving unusual orders from governments and corporations that had previously insisted on only the most advanced, perfectly designed vessels. Now they wanted ships that incorporated human design principles, controlled chaos, incompatible systems, and jury-rigged solutions that worked despite making no logical sense. The Naxari began building ships with deliberately mismatched components. The Velthari started introducing random elements into their crystal-based technology. Even the proud hegemony military began experimenting with vessels that looked more like the Soul's Pride than their traditional sleek warships. Engineer Erin Park found herself in high demand as a consultant, traveling to different worlds to teach alien engineers how to make things work by not working properly. The secret, she would tell them, is to never let your technology get too comfortable. Always keep it guessing. A year after the battle, Captain Hansol received an official communication from the Galactic Council. It was an invitation to return to their chambers, but this time not as a supplicant asking for membership. This time, they wanted to offer him command of the Council's new defense fleet, a collection of deliberately imperfect ships designed to face threats that perfect technology couldn't handle. Hansol declined politely. The Soul's Pride was his ship. His crew was his family, and there were still impossible jobs out there that needed doing. Besides, someone had to show the rest of the galaxy that sometimes the best way to solve a problem was to ignore the rules and make it up as you go along.